Hello, my name is Voya and welcome to My Deep Guide. So you've done your research, you narrowed down your selection and you decided to buy one of the many Boox devices that are on offer today. And because you've diligently done your research, right, you know that one of the things that you can expect, or you must expect, is a bit of a struggle and a learning curve with the user interface and the user experience of Boox. Now, the current state of Boox platform is absurd because there are like 3 distinct OS versions that are all slightly different in important ways for no apparent reason. While this video is not going to be like a guide for the whole thing, I will be addressing the key settings that you need to change on your Boox device when you get it in order to streamline your user experience and make things a little bit more accessible on your Boox device. So the very first setting that I would advise you to change on any of the Boox devices, and thankfully it's consistent across all of the Boox OS versions, is basically to just swipe down and find the mute notification option and or do not disturb. So the do not disturb, it's up to you, you can choose whatever you want, but the mute notifications option is quite important, because the state of the operating system on Boox is not really that good, and there are still some issues. For example, whenever you hook up a physical keyboard, it wants to chime a notification even if you tell it that it needs to be silent or certain things like that. And also, the notification sound and the speakers are really shrill and bad quality on these devices, and it's not a pleasant sound whatsoever. And finally, the most important aspect is that these devices are supposed to be distraction-free devices, and that's where notifications are your absolute enemy. So the mute notifications on the OS 4, so on the Note Max, for example, it looks like that. On the Go 10.3, it's the same thing. You simply swipe down and you find in these options the mute notification or notification mute. Like, why would there be so many inconsistencies? But yes, mute notification or notification mute and do not disturb is on the regular OS 3.5.4, and on the tab version of the 3.5.4 you also have the same thing here, notification mute and do not disturb. It's just that the ordering is quite different, so you need to kind of find where they are, but the icons are the same and the adjustment of the option is the same across the board. The second setting that you should definitely check to configure and set the way you prefer on your Boox device are the sound settings, and they are in direct relation to the notifications as well because of the way how Android works. So on the OS 4 on the Note Max device, you can go to settings and then you can go to sound, and here there are a few things that you can actually check. So you can see that what we've discussed, muting and unmuting and the do not disturb options, are here in the sound mode themselves, so you can set them there as well. But much more importantly, we have these 2 sections. So I want to first focus on the volume section, and here you will see that you have different volume settings for media, notification, alarm and call volume. What that means is that some users get really confused by simply swiping this all the way to the negative. Here you see that you are only adjusting the media, but for example, if the notification volume was set at something like this, like really annoying, and you go down to here and you adjust the volume, and then you say like, hey, this is now muted and I shouldn't have any notifications, yet the notifications do sound quite a lot and really loudly. That is because the way that Android works is that the master volume control will control the default or the currently active sound source that is playing, or the sound type that is playing. Since we don't have the notification sound playing at the moment, what it's going to be defaulting to is going to be media. So just adjusting the volume here is not going to adjust everything. You need to go back into the volume sound settings and the volume section of the sound settings to adjust individual volumes. And you can adjust your alarm in-call volume. Well, this one doesn't have that. But the interesting thing here that you could do is, for example, if you go to mute notifications as the first one, it automatically lowers the volume of notifications. So the mute notification is simply a shortcut to the volume of the notifications themselves. But if you wanted to have a separate control over these things, this is where you would do it. Now, the second part of the sound settings that I want to focus on are the notification and alarm sounds that are there. So for example, you may want to just choose and set these to none. And if you go here and you choose, well, you will notice that none is not really an option, right? So you don't have none at the top. And when you get to the M and N section, there is none. Logically thinking, you would say like, hey, there's no none option. I don't have an option to have no notification sound or no alarm sound. Well, there is, and it's a little bit tricky. And it's just by, you find the one that's active and you tap on it to deselect it. And the act of deselecting any notification sound will switch it to none. Now, this is not a normal way that this type of thing should work, but that's why I'm showing it to you, so that you know that you can set your sounds to none, but this is the way to do it. On the traditional OS 3.5.4 version, in this example, it's running on my Go 10.3. When you go to settings, seemingly you do not have sound option, and you don't, because you have languages and input, date time, power, network, calibration, password, account, system display, gesture service, firmware update, blah, 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 blah. So at the glance, you don't have these options, but it is still running on Android. So what do you do? Well, there's a trick. If you swipe down from here and then you long press and hold on the speaker icon here, that will transport you to the sound settings, which is actually hidden underneath. And here you have the exact same type of settings that you can adjust like we've seen before. And you have also the do not disturb options. And in this one, you do have none, so it works differently. So this one works normally because this is like a traditional unspoiled by Boox default Android option. So you have none. So you can go to none normally. And here in the default alarm sound, you can just go to none and turn it off that way. And on the OS 3.5.4 of the tab version of the OS, you have the same type of settings that you have on the OS 4. So you can just go to settings, you can go to sound, and you have the same type of behavior here. And it's again the same here. You do not have the none option, so you have to tap on it here, go back to disable the alarm sounds or the notification sounds. Another setting that is often overlooked but can be turned on by default is wireless LAN and Bluetooth active scanning. That is not only a security concern, but it's also a battery drain. And it's a little bit kind of hidden. It's not in WLAN, it's not in Bluetooth, it's not in networking connection. Where do you find it? Well, you find it in location information. So when you go to location information, then you have access location, permissions, but you also have wireless LAN and Bluetooth scanning. And when you go there, just make sure they should be off by default, but just make sure that they are indeed off. And if they are not, turn them off, because that is something that you really don't want to be constantly on. Yeah, as I said, battery drain and also a security concern. On the traditional 3.5.4 OS, again, you do not have that option exposed at all. So you have to dig around and look for it. And it's a little bit even trickier than the other one. So here, using the same kind of mentality, we press and hold location. We get into the Android option here, but when you look at it here, you don't see it. What you actually need to do is you need to turn on the location here and then tap on location services. And here you will have the in-depth overview of what the location services are, and Wi-Fi scanning and Bluetooth scanning is right there, and that's where you can verify that it's off. As I said, it should be off by default, but some apps and some settings can actually ask for that permission, and they can turn that setting to on, and it's just a good idea to make sure that this is off. So once you've checked, just remember to turn off location once again, and then you can just go back to your normal operations. And on the OS 3.5.4 tab version, we again have the same type of user interface like on the OS 4, and there you have settings, location information, and then you can directly access this in the wireless LAN and Bluetooth scanning tab that is located here. NeoReader as a platform is one of my absolute favorite reader platforms of any device, definitely, because it's super powerful and super capable and versatile. Unfortunately, the default settings of NeoReader on Boox devices are fairly bad, and the worst one of all is the first impression that you get, and those are the toolbars that you have on a NeoReader. This to me is an example of everything that's wrong with the mentality and thinking about the user experience on Boox devices. And this is this concept. When you open up a document, you're greeted by this ginormous thing that has all of the icons. And if you want to write, you can't. You actually have to go into the writing mode, and when you go into the writing mode and you figure that out, you're greeted by yet another toolbar that's actually shifting your focus now all the way on the top, and it's just distracting bonanza all over the place. So the default settings are abysmal. However, the good thing here is that NeoReader does allow you to customize all of these things in a really good way. So the first thing that I would advise you to check and set according to your own preferences are these toolbars. The handwriting toolbar, which is this one, and I guess just the general toolbar. There are a handful of things that I normally do. And the first one is, for my eyesight and for my aesthetics, the default size is way too big. So I would like to tap on three dots, go to floating toolbar settings, and here are all of the settings. Now, just so that you know, this here section, the tab that you see here, are the icons that are going to be displayed on your floating toolbar. And these are all of the options that you can add to it, but that are not currently displayed. You add and remove the options by simply pressing and holding, either with finger or with the stylus, and you drag it down there. So for example, I don't want an eraser and I don't want a text, and I'm just gonna make it super simple like this. Okay, so I've customized which options I want and which options I don't want to have on my floating toolbar. The next thing to adjust is the size. The size for me is 75%. That is something that works for me. You will experiment and adjust and see what works best for you. For the alignment, I prefer the vertical one. You can use whichever, but when we're talking about the floating toolbar for the handwriting toolbar, that's where you have to kind of keep in mind which one you picked. So I'm going to choose the vertical orientation. So now when I go back, I have a much cleaner situation. If I press and hold on the toolbar itself, I can move it around. So you can move it around to the left, you can move it around to the right, you can put it in the corner, or nobody puts baby in the corner, but you can put it anywhere you want. This is the location, a little bit up actually. Somewhere around here is what I like for my settings here. All right, so that's my floating toolbar. However, now when I go to this one, I still have that problem of complete inconsistency and attention being dragged away from the main point of operations. We can adjust that by, again, going to three dots here in the handwriting toolbar and going to settings, and again we have the same thing. These are the icons that are used in the toolbar, these are the ones that are not used in the toolbar. So for example, I'm not going to be using a fill, so I'm just going to use it there. I'm not going to be adding any text boxes. I would like to be able to remove shapes and eraser, because I do not need this, because the pen is able to do it and the AI recognition is able to do the shapes, but you're not allowed to do that. So Okay, this is as minimal as I can get it. Now the next thing is I want to match the size of the between the toolbars. Since I use 75% on the original one, I'm going to go all the way down to 75 on here. And here you have to remember which orientation is the one that you prefer. So I prefer vertical orientation, so I'm going to change this one to vertical as well. And now when I switched it, it is going to pop back here, and it is supposed to automatically think and understand where the position of the floating toolbar actually is. So now I have my handwriting toolbar here, and if I tap to go back, I simply change the icons depending on the mode that I'm in. So my floating toolbar is here, and this is my handwriting toolbar. So essentially, I've gone away from the concept of two different toolbars at two different places, and I keep my focus on one place alone. And the only thing that is changing is floating mode or toolbar mode or handwriting mode by tapping on this one icon, and everything else remains focused and familiar. So this to me is one of the most important settings that you need to kind of set and customize to your liking. So this is just the way that I prefer, but you can set it any way you want. The only important thing is consistent size and consistent orientation, so that you go away from that concept of getting your attention being distracted and dragged around all over the screen, and this approach solves that. Another aspect that you also have to consider is the collapsing of the toolbar. So the main toolbar, when you collapse it down, it collapses down to this little icon that you can tap on and it shows it back up, right? So that's fine. That's very intuitive. But as your experience with the device grows and you become more confident, you may want to explore additional options with this. And the options are these two here. First one is hide the indicator when it is collapsed. Bring it out by swiping inwards from either side. So if I choose that option and I go back here, and if I now collapse it, you will see that we no longer have that icon and we have a much cleaner option. But how do I bring it back up? Well, you swipe from a side, except that if you have side gestures as well, that's going to bring a problem. So on this one here, again, not really going to work properly. So you're seemingly now completely stuck. Like, I've hidden my toolbar and I can't get it back. How do I get it back? Well, don't panic, first of all, and bring a towel, and then go to more settings, and then you have your floating toolbar settings there. So you can always get to the floating and handwriting toolbars from the main menu, so that you can just fix these things if that's what happened. This can be circumvented by disabling side gestures. So if you're not relying on side gestures, then that's something that you can do. And basically you can go to settings, system navigation, slide gestures. And if we turn off slide gestures, right? And we now go back to the text here, we go to our toolbar, we enable that option of collapsing. There we go. So now it's going to be collapsed. And if I collapse it and I swipe from here, it will show up, right? Because we've added those corners and you can swipe from either of the sides. So this is an option that actually does work, provided that you are not using the side swipe gestures. I am using them, so I don't actually use that option, obviously. But while we're here, one last thing about customizing your toolbars is maybe you're gonna say like, hey, I just bought my books for reading. I do not care about annotating or anything like that. There's nothing about that I care about. Well, then you can just simply disable the toolbar completely, and you will not have it, and then the NeoReader will behave simply as an ordinary e-reader. And remember, if you want to enable it again, you tap in the middle to expose the options, you go to more, settings, floating toolbar settings, And then for the float bar that you want to enable, you just go back into enabling it, and presto, you are back to a normal mode of operations. While we're in the NeoReader, there's another set of settings that you may want to take a good look at, and those are regarding the formatting and the contrast of the image. So the first thing that you should definitely check out is the text enhancement. By default, NeoReader tends to really ramp up the text enhancement option, which is good if the document demands it or if your eyesight demands it. So it's definitely a good option to have, but by default, I would keep this at 0 as my starting point, and then you adjust it to your liking. The reason why is that it actually degrades the quality. The way that it boldens up the characters is that it degrades the quality quite considerably. And when you have something really fine, like a 300 ppi display on the Go 10.3 or on the Note Max, then it's really like a shame to kind of waste that crispness and really lovely quality on the default setting, which is always going to be on. The second thing that I would adjust is going to the contrast, making sure that all of these are at minimum, and I would turn the image smoothing option to on, because that introduces dithering, and it gets rid of the color banding when displaying images. And that way you get to set up a nice starting point for your documents and for the visual quality displayed on your device, and then you can adjust them further using all of these options, of course, to your liking. But try this as a starting point, because this will allow you to see what the device is actually capable of in displaying the image quality. And there are no differences across the different OS settings, so this type of behavior is exactly the same on all of the devices. By default, this is what you are going to be welcomed with when you open up a notebook on a Boox device. And I'm sure that you will agree that this and this are fairly different user experiences and how it may be perceived overall. And I'm not just talking about the thickness of the icons, which of course on the 354, it's really ugly, but it's much nicer here. But I'm just more talking about the clarity, because this, to my mind, is completely overwhelming. Yes, it's helpful that it has text and stuff, but having texts and icons and everything like fully here, this is something that's going to discourage and be not approachable for majority of users. So when you see something like this, it's intimidating. When you see something like this, you are probably curious, and this is something that I can manage, right? So let's get to this point from here. Thankfully, it's the same type of concept that we've already covered, because more or less they have the same type of approach for any toolbars, floating or docked toolbars, and this is a docked toolbar. So you go to more options and you go customize toolbar, and already again we are greeted with the familiar option here. After spending a little bit of time with your device, you should be able to kind of make an association with what each icon is, and the text is great there to have at the very start to get used to, but you should actually set your aim to be that this is basically just training wheels, because ultimately what you want to do at some point is to get to the option to turn the text off, because it's immediately going to clean things up quite a bit. Once it's done, there's no need for us to have all of the options all of the time. That is simply overwhelming. Instead, what I suggest that you do is that you keep the awareness that all of these tools are at your disposal. They're just not exposed in your toolbar. So you customize the toolbar to be as minimal as you need it, and then you add additional tools that you find yourself lacking or needing or using on a day-to-day basis. So for example, I know that I'm not going to be using the canvas. I don't like how it works, and it's simply not something that works with my workflow. I know that the AI shape recognition works quite well, so I'm not going to be adding shapes in a manual way. I'm also not going to be using the text option because that's not generally something that I use. So I'm going to remove some of the things that I don't need and just customize this in a way that works well for me. So the search I don't need or don't want it. Inserting I do want. Saving I have it set to save on exit, so I don't need that. Recorder only when I need it, I will add it. Filling, I don't really use it that much, so I'm just kind of getting rid of all of the stuff that I don't really need. And I'm not going to use the zoom either, and of course I'm not going to be using templates either, because the bottom layer is the template. And I'm just gonna try get rid of as many as I can. So I got my layers, lasso, gesture, insert, and AI. Let's see how that looks like. Suddenly, this becomes a very, very different type of a user experience and far more approachable than what we had before. And on the top toolbar, of course, you have all of your here, which you cannot really customize. You can customize which brush presets you have, but you can't really remove anything. So all of your brush and navigations are there. These are my tools, and I'm a happy puppy. So that's how I get to organize my main toolbar in a notebook. However, I prefer to use notebooks in a full screen mode, which again now introduces a problem because now we have another toolbar, right? So that's that duality. You have the main toolbar of the full view, so to speak, and then you have this full screen view when that's hidden, and now we have the floating toolbar. And now we have to adjust the settings of the floating toolbar again, but as you've learned by now, it's the same type of workflow. So we're going to be adjusting the size, and here comes another inconsistency. You remember that we've used 75% for the size of the toolbar in documents. When I use 75% here, and if I go to the document, you will see that the 75% width or size of the floating toolbar in NeoReader is not really the same as the 75% of size and width in the notes, which is a very unfortunate inconsistency, and again just like an example of just how messy Boox's OS system is, and that's why a video like this kind of needs to exist to help people make some sense out of it. So what I suggest that you do is that you basically have multitask switcher between the NeoReader. So you can see like that, okay? And I'm going to place a physical object that's not going to interfere. So I'm going to put it there. I'm going to go multitask switcher back to my notes, and I'm going to now adjust the size until it's, approximately where it should be. So let's try 90%. So around 90 to 95% is somewhat corresponding to the size of the 75% of the toolbar in the NeoReader. So yeah, there you go. So in the notes, that's what I would do. I would first try to match the orientation and the size of the toolbar. And of course, the second thing would be to adjust which icons I want to have and which icons I don't want to have in the floating toolbar. While this duality may be annoying, this is also something for you to explore, because you can see that I have quite a lot more options here in the floating toolbar. The reason for that is I can hide it easily, and then I can just show it and use the advanced options there. But I can also use this in a different way. I can choose one of the toolbars to be the one that contains advanced tools, and one of the toolbars to be the one that contains basic tools. It's up to you to decide which one is which. That's one thing to also consider when setting your toolbars for the notebooks. And of course, this setting of as well is exactly the same, and the usage of these settings is exactly the same across all the platforms. While we're in the notebooks, another setting that you need to check and set when you're done with your toolbars is actually to go to settings of the notebooks themselves. And that can be confusing, because when you're in a notebook, we go to settings here, but I only have customized toolbar. Okay, if I go to full screen mode and I go here, there's again just customized toolbar. There's no settings. Where do I do my notebook settings? And again, a brilliance of, well, that's a huge quotation marks under the brilliance of the Boox's user experience is you need to be outside of your notebooks and go into the notes module, and then you go to the hamburger menu here, and then you go to options. So it's super hidden, but it is there. And these are your general notebook options, where you have your stylus calibration, backup and restore, password setting, autosave frequency, which is quite important, how you want to set it up, handwriting recognition, language, and blah, 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 blah. So the first thing that I would like you to kind of consider and set is the autosave frequency of your documents. It could be a good idea to have an autosave option, or maybe you don't want to have an autosave option because you're saving multiple versions of different types of documents. That's completely up to you. So you have to be the one that actually decides that, but you need to be aware that that option exists and where you are able to find it. Now, the other option that's really, really useful for you to know is that you have the option automatically export as PDF after exiting a notebook. This is going to be a separate video, but this setting is key if what you're looking for is a slightly more advanced system where you have auto sync and auto backup that's not relying on Boox's account or anything like that. So for example, if I have my AutoSync app that synchronizes certain folders of this device with my Google Drive, I can set that one of those folders is the folder where I'm exporting my notebooks, and I can make sure every time I exit a notebook that that notebook and its current state is exported as a PDF to a specific folder, which is then automatically auto-synced and backed up to a Google Drive. Granted, it is not going to be in the native notes format, but it is a way of backing up your notes, at least in that PDF format. But one thing that you need to be aware of, absolutely, is that as the advisement says, the generation of PDF takes longer time, and if the content is extensive, so please be patient, right? So that can be a disruptive option if you're not in control of it. But you need to be aware of it, that this is something that you can absolutely have as an option. The final setting that you should consider setting is disabling the default Boox bookstore. That bookstore is just basically baggage that's not really useful, and you cannot uninstall it. But you can disable it if you're persistent enough and to find the option how to do it. On the OS 4, and I believe that it's the same on the tab version of the 3.5.4 OS, you go down to settings here, then you go to app and notification, and you will have the option store settings. However, when you click on it, we don't have the option to turn it off. For me, this was very, very confusing because the check mark is the same user interface icon that is used for selecting an option in notifications, for example. See where I'm going? And when you have a Boolean value, which is on or off, you have a dedicated UX icon for that. And this is an important thing because it tells to the user what kind of value it is and what you can do with it. So if you go here and you see this and you don't see on off, naturally you're going to simply go in, it's like, oh, I can't turn it off, when that's not the case. It's just a complete blunder, again, with the user experiences and user interface team of the Boox devices. So you can tap on it, you can turn it off. It's just that they're mixing and matching of what the Boolean value is going to look like in the option. So when you do that, then it goes to not enabled, and that is a good thing. On the traditional OS 3.5.4 version, right, you go to settings and you have a separate store setting option here, and you can enable it or disable it, right? It cannot be uninstalled, but it does the same thing. It's like, it's not an on-off, it just gives you that option. So you can disable it in the same way there. And in the tab version of the OS 3.5.4, it's exactly the same as on the OS 4, which means you go to settings, apps, notification, store settings, and you turn it off that way as well. All right, I hope that you found the video helpful and or interesting or useful. If you did, please like and subscribe and ding the notification bell in the description below to get notified when new videos come out on MyDeepGuide. Also, do go to mydeepguide.com/shop, where you can find MDO and MMP. Both are hyperlinked PDF workbooks that help you organize all of your, in the case of MDO, yearly, quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily organizing or journaling needs. And in case of MMP, My Deep Guide Meeting Planner, all of your meeting planning needs. If any of this sounds interesting to you, you can find more details in the hyperlinks in the description below, but also know that purchasing one of these products directly supports independence of My Deep Guide. So thank you very much. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, stay healthy, and see you in the next video. Bye.